Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Hadi smirked as he stood over the fallen council president, his laser rifle still warm on the ground. Everything had gone according to plan, better than planned even. The security forces had fallen quickly. The council members were now hostages, and the station was effectively under Gorian control. The only thing he hadn't foreseen was that the human's definition of a weapon was considerably broader than that of his species. But why would that matter now? His soldiers had the only real weapons aboard the station.
"Look at you now, mighty President Ozir," Hadi taunted, prodding the kneeling Trozerian with the barrel of his rifle. "Not so imperious without your guards, are ya?"
Around them, the Grand Council chamber, once a pristine symbol of interstellar cooperation, had become a slaughterhouse. 14 bodies of Trozerian security personnel lay sprawled across the polished metallic floor, their thick brown fur matted with crimson blood that pooled beneath them. The Trozerians were massive creatures, resembling what humans might call yetis, standing nearly 8 feet tall with broad shoulders and powerful limbs covered in dense, chocolate-brown fur that grew thicker around their necks in lion-like manes. Their normally imposing presence, with prominent brow ridges over deep-set eyes and jutting lower jaws revealing sharp canines, was diminished in death. Their ceremonial silver-threaded uniforms, designed to decrease their natural intimidating presence, were now torn and soaked through with blood. Hadi himself was much smaller than the Trozarians, standing only 5.5 feet tall, but what he lacked in height, he made up for in density. His purple-hued skin stretched tight over powerful muscles, giving him a compact, explosive strength. His round face featured a perpetual smirk beneath small, shrewd eyes, while his head was completely hairless and gleamed under the chamber lights. He wore the traditional battle dress of Gorian commanders, a form-fitting black bodysuit overlaid with segmented crimson armor plates that accentuated his muscular physique.
"Do you regret it now?"
Hadi asked, circling the kneeling president while his 3 generals laughed.
"Do you regret your precious weapons ban? All that talk about peaceful cooperation and diplomatic solutions."
He spat the words as if they were poison. President Ozir, a particularly tall Trozerian, whose silver-streaked fur marked his advanced age, remained dignified even on his knees. His ceremonial robes, once resplendent with the emblems of all 57 council species, were now stained with the blood of his guards.
"You were so afraid of the humans causing an incident," Hadi continued. "So paranoid they might disrupt your precious annual meeting with their unremarkable ways. Yet here we are."
He gestured broadly with his weapon.
"It wasn't the humans you should have worried about. It was us."
Hadi's generals, Abdar, Brior, and Kryzar, formed a semicircle behind their commander, each holding their own laser weapons trained on the council president. They chuckled at their leader's mockery, savoring their victory.
"You want to know how we did it?"
Hadi leaned in closer to Ozir's face.
"How we managed to overcome your impenetrable security measures?"
Without waiting for a response, Hadi launched into an explanation, clearly enjoying the chance to boast about his triumph.
"The annual Galactic Cultural Exchange, your crown jewel event where species share their artistic achievements. So trusting, so open."
Hadi's voice was thick with sarcasm.
"Our engineering team spent months designing weapons that could be disassembled into components indistinguishable from artistic tools and musical instruments."
He holstered his weapon and pulled out a small metal component from his armor.
"The firing pin? Scanned as a tuning fork for a Gronian string instrument. The barrels? Hidden inside ceremonial flutes. Power cells disguised as traditional light sculptures."
Hadi's eyes gleamed with pride.
"While your security was busy scanning the humans, our cultural delegation was bringing in everything we needed, piece by piece."
Hades circled the president again, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous chamber.
It took our team 15 standard months to design these modular weapons. Each component had to appear harmless when scanned individually, yet useful enough to function flawlessly when assembled.
He stopped in front of Ozir again.
While you were all congratulating yourselves on your peaceful little gathering, my soldiers were assembling laser rifles in the maintenance corridors.
Satisfied with his moment of gloating, Hadi turned to his generals, his expression shifting from smug satisfaction to business-like efficiency.
"Report,"
he commanded, addressing the trio collectively.
"What's our status throughout the station?"
The three Gorian generals exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier mirth evaporating. All three bore the same purple skin and muscular build as their commander, though each had distinctive features that set them apart. General Abdar, the tallest of the three with a long scar running from his left eye to his jaw, stepped forward first. His armor bore additional technical modules, indicators of his role overseeing their engineering operations.
"Commander, we've secured the main council chambers, administrative offices, and communication hubs,"
Abdar reported, his voice deep and measured.
"All council members have been detained in their quarters under guard. The station's command systems are under our control." "Excellent," Hades nodded. "And the resistance? I assume the station security forces have been neutralized?"
Again the generals exchanged uncomfortable looks.
"Well?"
Hadi prompted, his tone sharpening. Brior, the broadest of the three with distinctive red markings painted on his bald head and arms, cleared his throat. His armor was reinforced at the shoulders and knees, designed for maximal physical impact.
"Most of the security forces have been neutralized or contained, Commander," Brior said, "but we're experiencing unexpected resistance from certain quarters."
Hadi's eyes narrowed.
"Explain."
"Some species haven't surrendered," Kreiser added. He was the smallest of the three generals, with quick, darting eyes and light blue tattoos covering his exposed skin. His armor was lighter than the others, designed for speed rather than brute force.
"They've barricaded themselves in various sectors of the station." "Which species?"
Hades demanded, his earlier satisfaction rapidly deteriorating. The generals hesitated again before Abdar finally answered.
"The humans, Commander."
Hades stared at his general for a moment before letting out a bark of laughter.
"The humans? Those crazy creatures?"
He shook his head in disbelief.
"They don't even have natural defenses. No claws, no significant strength, just some endurance. And you're telling me they're giving you trouble?" "It's not their security teams that's the primary issue,"
Brior clarified reluctantly.
"We neutralized most of their armed guards quickly." "Then what is the problem?"
Hades' voice had taken on a dangerous edge.
"It's their civilians,"
Kreiser admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Hadi froze, certain he had misheard.
"They're what?" "They're civilians, Commander," Abdar confirmed. "The non-military personnel. They've organized resistance in multiple sectors of the station."
For a moment, Hadi simply stared at his generals, his expression unreadable. Then he exploded.
"You mean to tell me,"
he growled, advancing on the three,
"that my elite soldiers, armed with their advanced laser weapons, are being held at bay by unarmed human civilians?"
The generals backed up a step, none wanting to be the focus of their commander's wrath.
"Perhaps you should explain yourselves individually,"
Hadi said, his voice now unnervingly calm.
"Abdar, begin. What exactly is happening in your sector?"
Abdar straightened, trying to maintain his dignity despite the embarrassing report he was about to deliver.
"Commander, my team secured the engineering sections as planned, but we overlooked the human engineering team working on the maintenance of their ships."
He swallowed hard.
"We initially didn't consider them a threat, since they were civilian contractors, not military personnel."
"And?" Hadi prompted.
And they've converted their maintenance tools into weapons, Abdar admitted. They've barricaded themselves in the maintenance bay and have rigged defensive systems throughout the surrounding corridors. What kind of defensive systems could they possibly create without weapons? Hadi demanded. Abdar's expression grew grim. One of my soldiers was, cut in half, Commander. Cut in half? Hadi repeated incredulously. With what? Some sort of modified industrial cutting tool. The humans call it a plasma saw. It's designed for cutting through hull plating during repairs, but they've reconfigured it into a handheld weapon. Abdar seemed genuinely disturbed by the memory. The human wielding it was laughing, Commander. He called himself a DIY enthusiast, and said he'd been waiting for this chance his whole life. Hadi stared at his general, momentarily speechless, then turned to Brior. And your sector? Brior shifted uncomfortably, his massive frame suddenly seeming smaller. We encountered resistance from a group of humans who identified themselves as athletes, he reported. They were here for a cultural sports demonstration as part of the exchange. Athletes? Hadi repeated flatly. Sports players? Yes, Commander, Brior added. We didn't consider them a priority target since they weren't military or administrative personnel. And now? They've barricaded themselves in the station's reaction facilities. They're using their sports equipment as weapons. Brior hesitated. One of my soldiers was killed when he was struck in the head by a metal ball thrown at extremely high velocity. A metal ball? Hadi's voice rose in disbelief. They killed one of our warriors with a ball? Yes, Commander. The humans called it a bowling ball. Apparently it's part of a game they play. Brior looked genuinely confused. They have multiple games involving projectiles. Some use smaller balls they hit with stringed implements. Others use larger balls that they throw through elevated hoops. The other generals looked equally perplexed at the concept of sports involving projectiles. You're telling me, Hadi said slowly, that humans have recreational activities that involve hurling objects at high speeds for fun? Yes, Commander. Brior nodded. And the athletes are remarkably accurate with these projectiles. They've also fashioned weapons from what they call hockey sticks and baseball bats. Hardened implements that they're using to hit our soldiers. Hadi turned to his first general, who seemed to be trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. No small feat for a muscular Gorian in battle armor. Greiser, Hadi said, his voice dangerously soft. What about your sector? Kreiser visibly flinched at being addressed directly. Of the three generals, he was showing the most obvious signs of distress, with a sheen of sweat visible on his purple skin. Commander, he began, then stopped, clearly struggling to find words. Out with it, Hadi snapped. My team was assigned to secure the communal dining facilities and food preparation areas, Kreiser managed, his voice barely audible. And? Hadi prompted, his patience clearly wearing thin. We encountered resistance from the human chef, Kreiser finally admitted, his eyes fixed on the door. The council chamber went utterly silent. Even President Ozir, still kneeling on the floor, seemed to be holding his breath. The human chef, Hadi repeated, each word precisely enunciated. One chef. She's very small, even by human standards, Kreiser hurried to explain, as if this somehow made the situation more comprehensible. Female, approximately 1/5 the mass of an average Gorian warrior. She was preparing the human cultural dishes for the exchange banquet. And this diminutive female chef is giving your troops trouble? Hadi's voice had risen to a near shout. Kreiser seemed to shrink further. She's taken control of the entire culinary sector, Commander. I assume there is no casualties, am I right? Hadi asked. Kreiser mumbled something inaudible. Speak up, Hadi barked. 8 dead, Commander, Kreiser finally admitted, his voice cracking. And 5 more severely injured.
For nearly 30 seconds, Haddy stood perfectly still, staring at his general as if he couldn't comprehend the words he'd just said. The only sound in the chamber was the low sound of the station's environmental systems.
"Ain't dead," he finally repeated. "From one human chef." "She had knives, Commander," Kreiser explained desperately. "Many, many knives, and she moves fast. And the things she did with the cooking appliances!" He shuddered visibly. "I don't think my soldiers will ever be the same when they wake up."
Haddy held up a hand, silencing his general's increasingly frantic explanation. For several more seconds he remained utterly still, his eyes closed as if processing this information required his complete concentration. When he opened his eyes again, his expression was terrifyingly calm.
"Let me be certain I understand the situation correctly," he said softly. "We have successfully taken control of the Galactic Council station. We have hostages, including the Council President. We have overcome their security measures and armed ourselves with advanced weapons."
He looked at each of his generals in turn.
"And yet, we are being prevented from securing complete control of the station by a group of human engineers with power tools, athletes with balls and sticks, and a single chef, a small human female with kitchen implements."
Put that way, the situation sounded even more absurd. The generals seemed to shrink under their commander's gaze.
"The three of you,"
Haddy said, his voice now cold with fury,
"will personally deal with these resistance pockets. Take whatever forces you need. I don't care if they're civilians, maintenance workers, or culinary staff. Eliminate them. All of them. Is that understood?"
"Yes, Commander."
The three generals responded in unison, snapping to attention.
"I expect this situation to be resolved within the hour,"
Haddy continued.
"No excuses, no failures, or I will personally demonstrate my disappointment. Clearly."
The implied threat hung in the air between them.
"Dismissed,"
Haddy spat. The three generals bowed deeply before turning and marching quickly from the council chamber, each visibly relieved to escape their commander's presence, if not the impossible task before them. As they departed, President Ozir looked up at Haddy, and for the briefest moment, the Gorian commander thought he detected something like amusement in the Trozerian's eyes.
"Something to say, Mr. President?"
Haddy growled.
"Nothing at all,"
Ozir replied, his voice steady despite his position.
"But I believe you're about to learn why we're far more concerned about the humans causing an incident than any other species."
Haddy snorted dismissively and turned away from his captive. But as he surveyed the council chamber with its slain guards and the evidence of his supposedly flawless takeover, a flicker of unease passed through him. Perhaps he should have paid more attention to those strange briefings about the human beings after all. Edward Jones checked the load capacity settings on the hoist control panel, wiping sweat from his brow. The engineering bay had been transformed into a makeshift fortress, with tools and equipment repurposed into weapons and defenses. He didn't even know his companion's name. There hadn't been time for introductions when the attack began, only a desperate scramble to survive. They'd started identifying each other by their improvised weapons. Chainsaw, a lanky technician who'd removed all safety features from a hull-cutting saw, Melter, who'd converted an industrial metal cutter into a makeshift flamethrower, and Edward himself, whom they called Hoist Man, after he demonstrated what happened when you override the safety protocols on the bay's heavy lifting equipment.
"You think they've figured out where we are yet?"
Chainsaw asked, his modified tool whining in the background. Edward shrugged. If they haven't, they will soon. As if summoned by his words, the main doors slid open. A purple-skinned Gorian stood at the entrance, flanked by soldiers armed with laser rifles. His elaborate armor and the scar running down his face marked him as their leader.
"Attention, human engineers. This is General Abdar of the Gorian Liberation Force. You are surrounded and outnumbered."
Edward ducked behind his console as the general continued.
I have 34 elite warriors with me. Your resistance, while admirably resourceful, is futile. Surrender now.
Edward caught the eyes of his companions. A wordless communication passed between them as Chainsaw revved his weapon once and Melter adjusted something on his flamethrower contraption. Edward grabbed the controls. Above them all, a small maintenance shuttle began to move along the ceiling tracks.
I'll give you 30 seconds to lay down your weapons,
Abdar announced, unaware of the activity above. Edward stepped into the open, drawing Abdar's attention. "We're just maintenance engineers," he called back. "We don't want any trouble." The Gorian general smiled, his sharp teeth gleaming.
A wise decision, human.
But Edward wasn't surrendering. He was creating a distraction. As Abdar focused on him, Chainsaw and Melter launched their attack from opposite sides of the bay. Chainsaw burst from cover, his modified saw screaming as he cut through the first two soldiers before they could raise their weapons. From the other side, Melter unleashed a jet of superheated plasma that engulfed 3 more Gorians. The remaining soldiers recovered quickly, forming defensive positions and returning fire. Laser blasts scorched the walls and equipment, forcing the engineers back into cover. But they'd forgotten about Edward, and more importantly, they'd forgotten to look up. While the firefight raged, Edward had raised the maintenance shuttle to the maximum height allowed by the ceiling tracks. Now, with a few commands, he disabled the final safety protocols. "Hey, General," Edward shouted. "You should have paid more attention during the station orientation briefing." Abdar turned, his expression shifting from confidence to horror as he finally looked up to see the 15-ton maintenance shuttle suspended directly above his troops. Edward hit the emergency release. The shuttle plummeted, gaining momentum before crashing into the gathered Gorian forces with a thunderous impact. The explosion that followed, from ruptured fuel cells, consumed at least 20 soldiers in a fireball that scorched the ceiling. The survivors broke ranks and fled, their general gone, their dignity abandoned. When the emergency fire extinguisher drones begun to perform their jobs, Edward rejoined his companions.
"That was their general?"
Chainsaw asked, gesturing at the pile of burning metal.
"I don't believe it. There's no way it would be this easy to kill them if he was anything close to competent."
Edward shrugged. Military types never understand how much damage engineers can do. That's why they're running and we're still here. General Brior approached the recreation center with extreme caution. After hearing nothing from Abdar for a while, he wasn't taking chances. He'd brought 21 veteran soldiers, moving in tight formation with weapons ready. The recreation center was eerily silent, its main entrance partially open to reveal a dimly lit interior. Brior signaled for his point team to secure the entrance while he assessed the situation.
"Life signs,"
he whispered to the soldier operating their bioscanner.
"Multiple human readings inside, sir, spread throughout the facility."
Brior nodded grimly.
"Remember, these are just human athletes, civilians playing games. They're not soldiers."
His soldiers advanced into the recreation center in practiced formation. They made it exactly 12 steps inside before disaster struck. A black spherical object whistled through the air, striking a soldier directly in the head with a sickening crack. The Gorian dropped instantly, his skull crushed by the impact.
"Cover!"
Brior shouted, dropping to one knee and raising his weapon.
"What was that?"
one of his soldiers asked, panic in his voice.
"Some kind of projectile,"
Brior replied, scanning the shadows. From somewhere in the darkness came a human voice. "Strike! That's 10 points for the blue team!" Another voice responded.
"Nice throw, Martinez. Let's see if you can pick up the spare."
Before Brior could process this exchange, another projectile, larger and heavier, came rolling across the floor at high speed, only to hurt the foot of another soldier.
"This is ridiculous,"
Brior snarled.
"They're attacking us with metal balls. Advance in force. Full frontal assault."
His soldiers formed a firing line as they advanced deeper into the recreation center, where more expansive playing fields lay ahead. For a moment, the strategy seemed to be working. Then a human voice called out, "Loose!" Dozens of slim projectiles arced down from the upper level, where the humans had apparently taken positions. The sharp objects penetrated faces and necks, sending soldiers crumpling to the ground.
"What is this?"
Brior shouted as his troops fell around him.
"Sir, there's some kind of primitive projectile weapons,"
one of his remaining officers reported.
"The humans call them arrows. They're using stringed launching devices." "Impossible,"
Brior growled.
"The station was swept for weapons." "Something this primitive was not considered a weapon, sir,"
the officer replied grimly. Another volley claimed 3 more soldiers. Brior's force was being decimated without even making visual contact with their attackers.
"Fall back to those structures,"
Brior ordered, pointing to what appeared to be small rooms with transparent walls.
"We need cover."
The surviving Gorians made a dash for the indicated position. 2 more fell to arrows during the movement, but the rest reached the glass-walled rooms, only to realize they'd trapped themselves in squash courts with a single entrance. A human figure appeared at the court entrance. The man was tall with broad shoulders and muscular arms. In one hand, he held several small objects. In the other, a metal implement that widened at one end.
"You're in my house now,"
the human said calmly. "I'm the station's recreational director, gold medalist in 3 Commonwealth Games. Let me show you how we play darts on Earth." While partially covered, the humans sent one of the small objects flying directly at Brior. The projectile struck him in the eye with unerring accuracy, sending white-hot pain through his skull. His laser rifle clattered to the floor as he clutched at his face.
"That's a bullseye,"
the human announced. More darts followed, striking Brior in the shoulder, the chest, the leg. Each one wasn't fatal, but together they were debilitating, and the general found himself sinking to his knees. Through his remaining eye, Brior saw another human appear, this one even larger and carrying what looked like a cylindrical club.
"My turn,"
the newcomer said, hefting the implement.
"Let me introduce you to baseball."
The last thing General Brior saw was the baseball bat swinging towards his head.
"I don't like this,"
muttered one of the Gorian soldiers as they approached the culinary section.
"This doesn't feel right."
General Krizar couldn't disagree. After hearing what that tiny woman had done earlier, his confidence had evaporated like water on a hot plate. But with Hattie's threats ringing in his ears, retreat wasn't an option.
"Stay focused,"
he ordered, trying to keep the tremor from his voice.
"It's just one human, a small female at that."
"A small female who's already killed 8 of our brothers,"
another soldier countered.
"Maybe we should just surrender."
"She cut through Yurzik's neck like it was butter,"
a third added.
"One slice with that knife of hers, and his head was practically off." "Enough!"
Kreiser snapped, though fear undermining his authority.
"We have superior numbers and weapons."
They reached the station's main kitchen, a large, gleaming facility designed to prepare meals for multiple species. The doors stood open, revealing rows of cooking stations and equipment unfamiliar to the Gorians. All of them belonged to that woman. And there, at the far end, stood a single human figure. She was tiny, perhaps 5 feet tall with a slender build that made her look almost childlike. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore the white uniform of the station's culinary staff, now stained with Gorian blood. Most disturbing of all, she was smiling at them. The Gorian soldiers immediately dove for cover, weapons trained in her general direction, but no one willing to expose themselves to take a proper shot.
"Spread out,"
Krizar ordered.
"Surround our position."
But his soldiers remained huddled behind their cover, glancing nervously at each other.
"She can't hurt us from a distance,"
Krizar insisted, although he too remained safely behind a heavy preparation table.
"She only has knives."
"You didn't see what she did to the advance team,"
one soldier muttered.
"The doctor is still removing the spoon from him."
Realizing his authority was collapsing, Krizar rose from his position.
"I'll show you why there's nothing to fear. Follow me."
He stepped into the open, weapon raised, and began moving cautiously down the central aisle. The human chef watched him approach, then retreated through a doorway on the far side.
"See!" Kryzar called back. "She's running away."
Emboldened, the other soldiers emerged from cover, forming up behind their general as they advanced into the kitchen, surrounded by strange devices and implements. As they reached the center of the kitchen, one of the soldiers wrinkled his nose.
"What's that smell? Is that what human food smells like? It's revolting."
Another nodded.
"I don't know how they eat this garbage. It smells toxic."
From somewhere beyond the doorway came a small voice with a distinct accent.
"Food no smell bad. Gas leak smell bad."
The soldiers looked at each other in confusion.
"Gas leak?"
Kryzar repeated, not comprehending the significance. The answer came in the form of a small, flaming object that arced through the doorway and landed in their midst. A simple cloth wick wrapped around a metal container, and it was on fire. Then Kryzar understood.
"Take cover!"
Too late. The makeshift incendiary device ignited the accumulated gas. The resulting explosion caught most of the Gorian forces in a fireball that engulfed the central cooking area. Kryzar, thrown clear by the initial blast, lay on the floor near one wall, his uniform smoldering and skin blistered. Through smoke-blurred vision, he watched as the tiny chef emerged from the doorway, seemingly unbothered by the devastation. She moved slowly through the burning kitchen, checking each fallen soldier with clinical detachment. Those still moving received swift attention from the long chef's knife she carried. Eventually, she reached Kryzar. Kneeling beside him, she examined his injuries with the same critical eye she might use to evaluate a cut of meat.
"You alive?"
she stated rather than asked, her expression unreadable. Kryzar could only groan in response, every breath sending fresh waves of agony through his burned body. The chef looked around at the devastation, the scorched equipment, the burning bodies, the ruined food preparation. Her expression hardened.
"Someone pay for wasted food," she said, raising her knife. "Good ingredients, not cheap. Council budget, not infinite."
Hadi stared at his datapad with growing disbelief. No reports, no confirmations, no status updates from any of his generals. Just silence, and something far worse. On the tactical display, multiple Gorian ships were disengaging from their docking ports and accelerating away from the station.
"Your forces are abandoning you,"
President Ozir observed from where he still knelt on the council chamber floor. He hadn't taken a single step all this time. Hadi ignored him, frantically jabbing at his communication panel, trying to establish contact with someone, anyone under Abdar's command. Static and silence answered him until finally a harried voice came through.
"Commander Hadi, is that you?"
The voice was strained, punctuated by the sound of shouting and alarms in the background.
"Report! What's happening? Where is General Abdar?"
Hadi demanded. Then there was a pause. Then,
"Abdar is dead, Commander. All 3 generals are dead."
Hadi froze.
"That's impossible." "The humans, sir,"
the voice continued, a note of genuine terror creeping in.
They turned everything into weapons. Engineering tools, sports equipment, kitchen implements. Abdar was crushed under a shuttle. Brior was beaten to death with a wooden club. And Kryzar? We don't even know what exactly happened to Kryzar. But the survivors from his team are babbling about a tiny woman with knives and explosives. Survivors? How many casualties?
Another pause.
Over 70% of our force is either dead or wounded, Commander. The remaining troops are evacuating. No one wants to deal with these humans anymore. No one gave the order to evacuate,
Hadi shouted into the communicator.
With respect, Commander, you weren't there. You didn't see what they did.
The soldier's voice dropped to a whisper.
If I were you, I'd leave too before they come for you.
The communication cut off abruptly, leaving only static. Hadi stood motionless in the center of the council chamber, his mind struggling to process the unthinkable. His perfect plan, months in preparation, executed flawlessly, had somehow collapsed completely within hours because of humans, unarmed humans. Time slipped by unnoticed as Haddy stared blankly at his datapad, watching more ships depart. He barely registered the movement behind him as President Ozir rose to his full height, towering over the Gorian commander. The Trozerian's massive hand came down, not violently but with deliberate gentleness, lowering Haddy's laser rifle toward the floor. The gesture didn't reflect the harm Haddy's forces had inflicted upon him, or his security personnel. There was no anger in it, only a profound wariness. Ozir sighed heavily, the sound rumbling through his broad chest.
"You know, Haddy,"
he said, his tone surprisingly conversational, almost friendly.
"The weapons ban was never because we didn't trust humans with weapons."
Haddy looked up, confused by the president's calm demeanor.
"I've studied both your species and humans for many years," Ozir continued. "I understood both too well. I knew a clash between you was unavoidable. Your ambition, their crazy behavior when threatened, it was always going to end in conflict." "That means the weapon ban was,"
Haddy began.
"to protect our species from humans,"
Ozir finished for him.
"Yeah. When the inevitable confrontation came, and it was bound to happen, I wanted it to be less violent, more contained, perhaps under some commonly agreed terms, with proper protocols."
He shook his head sadly.
"But you ruined that possibility."
Haddy stared at the president, the realization dawning too late that the authoritative Trozerian he'd dismissed as a bureaucratic obstacle wasn't the tyrant he'd imagined. Ozir hadn't been restricting freedom. He'd been trying to create a framework where fundamentally incompatible species could coexist without destruction.
"Perhaps this was meant to be the outcome from the start,"
Ozir said, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness.
"Perhaps I was just a fool who tried to prevent nature to take its path."
Something in those words struck Haddy deeply, triggering an emotion he could barely comprehend. It wasn't just the failure of his mission that weighed on him now, but the recognition of his own profound misunderstanding of everything he'd been fighting against.
"What happens to me now?"
Haddy asked quietly, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. President Ozir looked down at him, his expression showing pity and resignation.
"The humans would probably want you," he said simply, "and I will probably allow them to have you."
Without another word, the Trozerian president turned and left the council chamber, his massive form silhouetted briefly in the doorway before disappearing from sight. Haddy remained alone amid the scattered evidence of his short-lived triumph, surrounded by the bodies of fallen Trozerian guards and the echoing silence of abandonment. Outside the viewports, the last of his ships vanished into the darkness of space, leaving him behind. In the distance, he could hear voices approaching, human voices. He thought about the weapons ban now, understanding too late that sometimes restrictions weren't about control. Sometimes they were about protection. And he had just discovered which species truly needed protection.